Okay, here we go with a few examples. I will show you the steps to go through in graphing or correctly graphing a trig function. I like to start with the graph. Sometimes you may have to change it around depending on how far up or down it's going. So there we go. First thing I say is it has a vertical shift of 6. That means the midline points will be up at 6. So here I'll draw a dashed line showing where the midline points are going to go. Then since the amplitude is 4, that means the high points will be 4 higher than 6, which takes them up to 10, and the low points will be 4 lower than 6, which takes them down to 2. Then I say, all right, the only number in front of the t is an invisible 1, so there will be no change to my typical, normal, everyday cosine graph that you can see up here. Cosine starts at the high point, goes to the midline, to the low point, to the midline, back up to the high point again, but actually I did that in the wrong order. But that shows you it doesn't matter exactly what order you do things in. In this case, the last thing I'll be doing is showing the t-coordinates of all of the important points. So if I divide 2 pi into 4 equal sections, that means I'm multiplying 2 pi by 1/4. I get pi over 2. So 1 pi over 2, 2 pi over 2, 3 pi over 2, and 4 pi over 2. And there's my graph. Okay, let's look at the next one. For this one, again, I'll start by making my xy axis. There is no vertical shift, or in other words, there's an invisible +0 right there. That means that there is 0 shift, which means the midline points will be right on the x-axis. There is no number in front of the sign besides the invisible 1 that's in the front there. Let's make it invisible again. Okay, so that means that the high points are up at 1 and the low points are down at -1. However, in this case, there is a b that's not a 1. b is equal to 8. Therefore, the period is equal to 2 pi divided by 8, which is pi over 4. So that means this graph will complete one whole cycle after only a distance on the t-axis of pi over 4. Now, in order to correctly label the t-axis so that I have the correct coordinates for all of my important points, I need to divide this section of the graph, pi over 4, into 4 equal sections, which I will do by multiplying by 1/4. That means the size of each of these sections, here, 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 and here, is pi over 4. This one is 1 pi over 4. This one is 2 pi over 4, which was, of course, the same as, I got pi over 16. Let's go back. Okay, I don't feel like starting all over again. So I am going to erase this pi over 4, this mistake I made here. Erase this pi over 4 here. And erase the 4 here. It should be pi over 16. 1 pi over 16, 2 pi over 16, which is the same as pi over 8. 3 pi over 16. 4 pi over 16, which is the same as pi over 4. Now I look at this and say, aha, it's a sine graph. You can go back and look if you want to see what the sine graph looks like. The sine graph, as you can see, starts at the low point. Starts at the midline, goes to the high point, to the midline, to the low point, and back to the midline again. So I will do that with this graph from the midline to the high point, to the midline, to the low point, to the midline, and the graph looks like this. One period of the graph of f of t is equal to the sine of 8t. Now one last problem here in application. So here it says, I'm sick. My temperature can be modeled by that function that's given right there, where T is the number of hours after 8 a.m. So first it says, find the period of the function. Remember, the period will be 2 pi divided by b. In this case, b, the number in front of the input angle T, is pi over 3. That means the period is 2 pi over 1 times 3 over pi. The pi's cancel and the period is equal to 6. The amplitude of the function is, of course, the invisible number in front of the cosine, the invisible 1 there. So the amplitude of the function is just 1. Now I go to sketch a graph of the function. Again, I will do my xy axis. The graph is being shifted up 100, so that means that my midline points will all be up at 100. The amplitude is 1, that means the high points will be up at 101 and the low points will be down at 99. The period is 6. So I need to divide that up into 4 equal sections. 1/4 of 6 is equal to 6 over 4, or 3 over 2. And in this case, it makes a little more sense to put that as a decimal 1.5. So each of these units is 1.5. 2 times 1.5, which is 3. 3 times 1.5, which is 4.5. And 4 times 1.5, which is 6. Now, before I draw the graph, let's actually label what each of the axes mean. So it's saying T is the number of hours after 8 a.m. So the T-axis represents hours after 8 a.m. The F of T-axis represents the temperature, my temperature, which we'll assume it's in Fahrenheit, so temperature in Fahrenheit. It is the positive cosine function, which starts at the high point, goes to the midline, down to the low point, back up to the midline, up to the high point again. But I say to graph 2 periods of the function. So look out, here I come. Here, maybe I should go back to blue. Okay, so I go from 6 to 7.5 to 9. Let me erase some of this here. Sorry about this blank space. Well, that should be good enough. To 10.5 to 12. And of course, the graph will continue. Again, let's start at the beginning. This is the high point, midline, low point, midline, high point, midline, low point, midline, high point again. So here's 2 cycles of that graph. So it looks like at 8 a.m., my temperature was 101 degrees. Then between 8 a.m. and 11 a.m., my temperature went down to 99 degrees. But from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m., my temperature went back up to, let me write that down so I don't forget, 2 p.m. My temperature went back up to 101 degrees. Then between 2 p.m. and 5 p.m., my temperature went back down to 99 degrees. Then from 5 to 8 p.m., my temperature went back up to 101 degrees. What do you think I have been doing to try to manage my fever?